seriously. So the Poles were part of that interesting Slavic culture. And of course I studied Russian history because it was the 80s and I was focusing on the role of ending the Cold War. And I took the view that here we are with these Russians and East Europeans have got nuclear weapons aiming at the West. We've got nuclear weapons aiming at them. Shouldn't we study each other's philosophies instead? Wouldn't that be better? So in 1990 I went to Moscow and I was elected coordinator of Philosophers of Peace globally. I loved Moscow. It was a really amazing experience for me as a young man, meeting Russian intellectuals who were mostly much older than me. And I was very impressed by them. Russian intellectuals were great polymaths. They studied like 10 different subjects and they were experts in at least 12 of them. I met some amazing Russian intellectuals who'd been Marxists, but they were now just coming out and saying, well, I think I'm a post-Marxist more. It was the era of Gorbachev. And so these Russian intellectuals wanted to talk about peace with me as a representative of Western or British intellectuals, and we got on really well. I'm still in touch with some of them. Putin at that time was just a junior operative in the intelligence services who was very annoyed, driving taxis around St. Petersburg. And he wasn't an intellectual. He did a training as a lawyer at the University of St. Petersburg, and he was a thug right from the beginning. He was in the KGB, which was the worst Stalinist kind of thug group who, ever since the Bolshevik Revolution, had been bullying, beating and shooting people. You know, I'd studied Solzhenitsyn. I knew about the mistakes Stalin had made. It had all come out by then, in the early 1980s, and so I read the histories of the Gulag and all that and was shocked, especially since my mother was a communist who looked on Marx as, you know, Saint Marx, who'd cracked the whole economic system of humanity and, you know, presented a blueprint for how we can build a better life. I agreed with her on the utopian project, like Ernst Bloch, but I disagreed with her on the implementation of it, which, you know, I mean, people like her, of her generation, didn't know about what Stalin had been up to behind the scenes, had not a clue. But so anyway, I got very interested in all this, and of course I was studying. When I was a student at SEAS, the School of Slavonic and East European Studies, I said to my tutors, I said, well, why aren't you teaching philosophy here? Because I just spent 5 years studying philosophy and launched Philosophers of Peace. And they said, well, not much call for it, you know. And I discovered there was nobody in the whole of the UK studying Russian philosophy, let alone Soviet philosophy or Slavic philosophy. There were little pockets of intellectuals, but all working autonomously. So I tried to set up, I got a philosophy, I think I called it a philosophy club at the School of Slavonic and East European Studies. And I invited in lecturers. It was all just I was doing it as a student, right, a student society. And we invited in leading thinkers from around the UK who had some knowledge about Russian and Slavonic philosophy. And we had meetings. This is back in the early 80s, and that's sort of mid to late 80s. I was there from 85 to 88. And I met some fantastic people. One of my favourite lectures was by C.M. Woodhouse, who was a Conservative MP, retired, who was a fan of Gemistos Plethon, who was the great intellectual of Greece in the 1400s, at the time of the fall of Constantinople. He'd been a pagan who said we should go back to worshipping Zeus and the ancient Hermetic wisdom and Plato, and that's why we're about to fall. And he predicted the collapse of Greece under the Ottoman Empire. And he came to Florence and gave lectures. He met Cosimo de' Medici, brought the complete works of Plato, and he gave it to Florence and said, you take over from here. And that's where the Florentine Academy was set up. And that accounted for the Platonic Renaissance of European history, and Cosimo de' Medici's sponsorship of the artists, and Lorenzo de' Medici. They sponsored Raphael and all that amazing Renaissance art and philosophy. Well, Plethon was the trigger. And so, you know, when we had C.M. Woodhouse come and give us a lecture, it was wonderful. And So, and I also got very interested in asking questions about Russian religion. I was exploring the hypothesis that Marxism was a sort of religious thing, even though it claimed there's no God, but that itself is a religious position. So I was looking at it theologically, and saying, well, let's scratch around what's going on here. I gave a lecture at the Theosophical Society. I discovered that many early theosophists were from Eastern Europe, like Gurdjieff, like Madame Blavatsky, like Steiner. There seemed to be an East European connection to theosophy, which I speculated was because they like to think in big swathes. They look down on English intellectuals as pathetic little shopkeepers, like Napoleon did, and I understand where they're coming from, but I don't think it's totally fair, because there are some British people that like to think in broad sweeps too, and sometimes it's better to go in cautious steps than make the wrong broad sweep, like Stalin did, or Putin. So there's something to be said for British empiricism and caution, I would say. But anyway, Russian Slavonic paganism is fascinating. To understand it, you have to really understand the whole Slavic evolution of the Slavic peoples. This particular deity, primary deity of the Slavs, his name Perun means the first, the origin, the most high. He's the highest god of the Slavic pantheon. He's the god of sky, thunder, lightning, storms, rain, fertility, oak trees, and law, and also war. And it's interesting, I remember writing this chapter at the time of Putin's invasion of Ukraine. And I was thinking, oh no, Perun's up to trouble. There is a warlike streak in human beings, and the Slavs have sadly got a warlike streak in them, as we all do. I give the information about Perun in the Tarot of the Gods. Perun was also associated with human sacrifice, and there's a tradition that every spring young maidens performed magical dances in his honour. Sometimes they would even go till they died. And Stravinsky knew of these traditions and turned it into his famous work, The Rite of Spring. So, and there seems to have been human sacrifice to Perun. When Vladimir I chose, he came to Kiev and he did a sacrifice to Perun as a sort of offering. And he chose to kill a Viking in this sacrificial way. He later became a Christian. So I suppose he was seeking redemption. And the Slavs turned away from Perun worship and they became Christians. But, was it, there was something of the worship of Perun going on deep in the unconscious, as Schelling or Jung would say. And since the end of communism, when religion was pretty much frowned on, some people in Russia and other Slavic states have gone back to the ancient pagan ways, just as we in Britain have gone back to the Druid traditions, which we never completely lost. The Russians now go off into the woods and worship Perun in spring, and I don't think they do human sacrifices. I think they've grown out of that, but they certainly dance around and do, religious rites and so on. Mokosh was the wife of Perun, a fertility goddess, seen as another aspect of Mati Zemlya, who's the goddess of the Slavic peoples, the moist earth, the Slavic earth mother. And she was for the Ukrainian people as well as the Russian people, and the Bulgarian, and the Czech, and the Slovenes, and so on. And Slavists have gone into all this in some detail. Another thing that's interesting about Perun is he had 3 heads. He had these wooden statues, and on the top were 3 heads that survey the whole of the landscape. And this is like Brahma. I think it's probably the case that Perun and Brahma go back to a common origin, because the Slavic peoples are part of the great Indo-European peoples, of which the Vedic peoples, who worshipped Indra, brought those teachings into India. And it seems to me that Purun and Brahma possibly are connected. So I think, I would like to think that if people deep dive into the ancient traditions, they find ultimately wisdom. And the Slavic culture intends towards peace. I mean, the word Slav or Slovo means the word. It's people that share the community of the word. And this was why in Christianity they liked the idea that we all come from the one Logos. Christ symbolized the eternal Logos, but we all share in that. And that's what makes us a community. So there shouldn't be war between the different parts of the one being, which is the cosmic Logos, to use St. John's image. And St. Paul also talked about this. And there have been many great intellectuals in Russia and all the other Slavic worlds who've emphasized peace. I used to belong to the Fellowship of St. Sergius and St. Alban, which is a thing for Anglican, Slavic, Orthodox, reconciliation. Because intellectually there shouldn't be what Putin has done is completely against the teachings of Christ by attacking a fellow Slavic nation with no justification. Instead of trying to make peace, he has tried to justify it with pseudo-intellectual justifications. The German president ticked him off for trying to quote Kant recently. I mean, Putin has aspirations to being taken seriously as an intellectual, like his interview he gave with that Tucker chap. But it doesn't work. You can't justify the invasion of Ukraine. I mean, you could say, well, I've gone crazy. I'm a Perun worshipper. I just want to slaughter and kill. That would be at least honest, and then we'd know where we are. We're up against a madman whose reinterpretation of ancient wisdom is it can free us up to slaughter and kill each other. Well, I will stand up against that with Kant and with all the kind of the legacies of the European Enlightenment, which since Kant we've all been working towards a peaceful continent. Anyway, that's there's much more we could say about that, but hopefully that gives an idea where Slavic paganism comes from. I just hope that it recovers its peaceful wisdom and focuses more on the moist Mother Earth tradition than the fiery patriarchal god who wants to fly missiles around. Okay, the one I got, which was interesting, well, I got on the cusp between liberation theology and shamanic Christianity. I think I'll go with the shamanic Christianity one, which is number 139. It's an unusual form of Christianity, but it fits with what I was saying about the recovery of paganism by Christians. It's really come out of North America. Intellectuals in America have sat and meditated on the wisdom of the North American Indian culture, the shamanic teachings of reverence for nature, respect for the elements, and working in harmony with the circle. So the American Indian shamans work in a circle. They found in parts of the central north states some wonderful medicine wheels with stones, like Stonehenge, from 1000 BC. The American Indians realized that this whole world is like a circular process. It comes in spirals, time moves in circular form. And therefore we humans should be humble. And so when they make decisions in their medicine lodges, which are circular, somebody speaks for each of the four elements: the earth, air, fire, and water. And the people from the fire side would speak about, let's act now, let's do this, let's immediately go and have a revolution or fight or whatever. The people from water would say, yeah, but how about the feeling? We might hurt people, we might kill lots of women. And the people from the north, or the element of earth, would say, let's not, they're the conservative ones that want to keep things as they are. And the people from the air would say, let's think about it, let's use our intellect, let's ask spirit, great spirit. So there's this understanding in decision making among the shaman cultures of North America that everybody's voice is important. And I discovered all this when I went to North America and did some teaching in an American Indian sanctuary, seminary called Sancta Sophia Seminary. And I met modern day descendants of the Cherokees and other Indian tribes in Oklahoma who initiated me into their ceremonies, the peace pipe and so on, the right use of tobacco, and going back to the amazing traditions of the white buffalo calf woman who brought tobacco to the American tribes and why. I learned all this stuff. And then I learned about Daganoweda, who was the great peace teacher of the American people. He lived in the Iroquois lands around the Great Lakes in the northeast of the country before the whites ever turned up on the continent. And he created this system of federal decision making among all the tribes, that if there were disputes, it would be mediated and resolved. So, and because I was born in that place, in Montreal, that's my home, I've always associated with Daganoweda since I discovered him. As children, we're never taught this stuff in schools. I had to find it the hard way by flying thousands of miles to Oklahoma and devouring the contents of American Indian Studies libraries at the University of Oklahoma and places. Now, okay, so that's the shamanic type of stuff. Now, a bunch of Christians in America, very clever people like Matthew Fox and many others, have realized that this is very compatible with what Christ is supposed to be about. This respect for peace, respect for everybody's voice. And that the kind of patriarchal, violent Christianity that came to America therefore needs softening. You can't do the conquistador thing and remain faithful to what Christ was really on about. So there are people now that will call themselves shamanic Christians. They believe that the teachings of the North American shamans and other shamans around the world have to be calibrated back into the teachings of Christ, and who himself was a kind of shaman, because the shamans like to travel between the worlds, so this physical world is not the only world. There's the in-between world of emotions and astral experiences and out-of-body travels, and then there's the highest realm, the spirit world, spirit kingdom, where the ancestors live, where the wisdom elders live, where Daganoweda lives, or Christ. And we're little pilgrims on a journey to prove that we're worthy to gain access to that. And so I think so there are people now in America who and elsewhere in Europe and Britain who realise that shamanism and Christianity need to be integrated and synthesised. And so that idea of shamanic Christianity is now a theme. I've got in my huge library of Christian theology, I've got some books about this, and it's absolutely fascinating stuff. Now, I can see the link here with what they're doing in Russia. You see, in a sense, the Russians who pioneered the study of shamanism, because when they opened up Siberia, their anthropologists went and met shamans. I've been to an exhibition of shamanic art from the St. Petersburg Museum. It was roving around. It was actually in Ljubljana in Slovenia at the time. And they showed some old film, black and white film, of shamanic rituals that had been photographed and filmed by Russian scientists who've pioneered the academic study of shamanism. But of course, in the time of the Stalin Dark Age, all this was suppressed and they were forcibly deconverted from shamanism and forced to become good communists and to disavow the gods. And if they insisted, then they were killed and liquidated, which I think is just monstrous. And that level of suppression, it's in a sense it's similar to what some of the people did in the States with the massacres of the Indians at places like Wounded Knee, and the Sand Creek Massacre, which is one of the most horrific attacks by a Christian army, the American army, attacking American Indians, who were just a small band. And so both Russia and America, oppressed these indigenous people's wisdom. And I think it's time for both America and Russia to, instead of sort of wanting to have a nuclear war against each other, they should have a journey towards wisdom within themselves. I mean, it'd be great if Putin wants to resign and go off to a monastery and study shamanic Christianity. He would learn a lot of things about where he went wrong, and he should ask to, be taken in by some monastery which could give him a nice study room, and also that some of the Americans that did this stuff, that legacy of gung-ho imperialism that did the Iraq War in 2003, and that did invade Afghanistan for no real reason at all. They also need to go and do their studies, I think. So I can see there's a link between these two. And the answer is education. Yes. Okay, any other points, comments?
Oh, so many points. It was really a good session today. I was thinking you started the speech with the scientism and the problem between the link from scientism to metaphysics.
Yeah.
And I was thinking about shamanism, and you spoke about Russia, you spoke about the US, and I think there are some service, they are interested by the power of the shamans. And I've heard of studies that has been made on both sides, even in Russia or in the US, about the power of thinking, the power of praying, what happened after death or whatever. What do you think about that?
Yeah, I think that's true. It's a good thing to bring up. I mean, I did look into all this when I was made coordinator of Philosophers of Peace, and I'm aware that in the Soviet era there was a lot of research into parapsychology. And there's some studies been made of all that stuff. And of course in America they were doing the same thing. The Institute of Noetic Sciences was researching this, and there's a whole tradition of parapsychological research in America. And it's compatible with what they were doing in Russia. But my concern is that it's been maybe done for the wrong reasons.
Of course.
That the American military, the CIA types, got involved, and anything that was found out that was interesting was immediately sort of classified and said, no, that's ours, that's military secrets. And the same in Russia. Obviously, there was an attempt in the early period of the revolution, in the early 1920s. There's a very important book called Red Shambhala, which studies all this. A bunch of early communists who were genuine idealists, wanted a nice communist revolution like Gorbachev did. They wanted to marry up communism with Tibetan Buddhism and the Vajrayana tradition. And they said that Shambhala, which is the goal of Tibetan Buddhism, is compatible with communist utopia. Therefore, we should learn from Tibetan Buddhists about paranormal faculties, telepathy. The Tibetan Buddhists had an amazing track record of exploring paranormal faculties. So these early communists were saying, let's go and study with them. They set up an institute to do that, and they organized trips into the Buddhist world in Russia, and they and one of the chaps involved with that was the head of the KGB's cryptography division. So he was in charge of deciphering all the secret codes and things. This was back in 1920, 21. So they were onto this, but Stalin found out and had them all killed, liquidated, shut down what they were doing, and declared no research in that. It's just the Stalinist. Marxist, Leninist Stalinism is the only thing that matters, and only matters. So he crushed it all with killing. And that's a tragedy. And so I think I'd love it if my Russian colleagues and intellectual friends would rediscover this tradition of authentic Russian interest in the mystical, but not twist and divert it as Putin's done, because he's really interested in this stuff, into militarism and violence. I mean, that's pathology. How Putin could justify going and killing, Ukrainian men, women and children who just want to get on with their lives. The first law of dialectics, which is what the Russian philosophers like to call it, which means Socratic inquiry into ultimate truth. First law is you leave the guns outside the room. We're not allowed weapons in the philosophy club, right? Or the philosophy club is cancelled. And that's what these Russians have a tendency to do, is to kill you if they don't like what you're saying. And it's not just them. I mean, it's the Spanish Inquisition did this, the heresy hunters throughout history when the Protestants were going after witches. There's a tendency in human beings, we want everyone to agree with us, so we're going to kill them if they don't. That, I think, has got to be left outside the room. And so the first law of dialectics is peaceful inquiry into these things. And then I think these mysteries will be revealed to us. I think that's why Christ, who was obviously a master at all this stuff, he was obviously a highly developed practitioner of things like telepathy and God knows what, he called it mathematics because his students were called mathesis, meaning students of... The word maths means simply student. And in the Gospels it says that his mathesis, his students, would come together and ask questions. So he was running a maths club, in the best sense of the word. But that's why he insisted on peace. You couldn't join that school of wisdom if you were going to bring the weapons in. And that's why he told Peter to put his sword away and healed the guy in the Garden of Gethsemane. So I think that's what we have to hold on to as humanity now. We have to remember that, curious as we are to know all the mysteries, we've got to do the peace mystery first. Stop these wars, heal these mutual hatreds, and then we can go into the deeper mysteries. In the Greek tradition, Eleusis, there was the lesser mysteries, and only once you've done them could you get the greater mysteries. I think we're still, as a planet, we're in the lesser mysteries. But this at least is a map of all, right? Okay, let's just finish with a couple of gods, because Perun put an appearance in, but he wasn't officially the god of the night. He just came because it was Slavic paganism. I just want to see which two. You choose one.
Maybe he will come back.
If he wants to, he can, yeah. Okay, we've got Liber coming back, yeah. Thank you. Jolly good. Okay, so we've got two here. We've got Liber, the Ace of Water, who is a Roman god, and he's the god of liberation and liberty, and so that's why he's got the French flag, because in the time of the French Revolution, the patriots in France who went along with the idea of liberty, equality and fraternity became the slogan that's on every French mayor's building throughout France. You see this liberté, égalité, fraternité, and that is what Liber stands for. He's also the origin of the word liberal. I'm a liberal politically, among other things, and that meant you believed in the rights of people to have freedom of thought, freedom of assembly. It was an idea in the 18th, 19th century. And Liber was the god of all this. He was the god of wine, which brings comfort to people. And he had his own temples in Rome. He was associated with Bacchus. and it was seen as a sort of mystery cult. So it was like the mysteries. I mean, one of the greatest mysteries of all is freedom. Why do we have freedom? If God, the Creator, Great Spirit, wanted to give us a sort of chip inside so that we can only ever do what's good and right, and we would never be naughty ever, or do anything like, get drunk and whatever, he could have done that. But instead he gave us the freedom to do evil. But then we find out the hard way that it's not something we really want. And so freedom is the kind of, it's a double-edged sword, Liebe. But Schelling talks about this. Schelling believed in freedom as a philosopher. And so we're free to have these experiences on this plane. But ultimately we are free to choose the good. That was the philosophical realization. Because, for instance, the French started doing, they thought, we'll force everyone to be free. We'll shut all the churches down. We'll arrest the priests. We'll kill the priests. We'll blow up the monasteries. We'll make everybody worship reason by force. And so the French revolutionaries sent armed troops out to Bretagne, where they were still a bit, religious. And they fought them, and they killed them en masse and put the bodies into the Loire River. Rousseau said, you have to force people to be free. Well, and then Robespierre came along and said, yeah, we'll kill all the aristocrats, we'll kill all the intellectuals. Anyone that doesn't agree with the Committee of Public Safety, we'll just kill them. Well, okay, so that didn't last long, thank God, because the French people realised this is not acceptable, that there's got to be limits to that violence. You can't force people to be free. People have to choose it. And so eventually people grew out of that extreme misunderstanding of Liebe. But it was an interesting episode. But this revolutionary idea of liberty spread throughout Europe, and obviously Napoleon spread it, who had an idea of a constitutional republic with, he wanted to be consul and later emperor. That was a fatal mistake of Napoleon. You can't really have a republic with an emperor at the top. Somebody pointed out this to him at the time, and he kind of tried to fudge it because I think he'd slightly lost the plot. But anyway, the idea of liberty is still very important in not just politics, but also in philosophy. Freedom of thought, freedom of speech. These are very important values. And the other one, and that's partly why I support the Ukrainians. I think they should be free of having their country invaded. It's why I support anyone that's been oppressed or attacked. I think people's freedom is to live and to love. And if you oppress people with violence, I think this is it's an oppression of their actual fundamental human rights. So what do we do about it? Why is there so much evil on the planet? Well, we can turn to Osiris, who is the fool. He's the zero card. And he was also oppressed. He was attacked by his evil brother Seth, cut into many pieces. And the story ended really tragically. But because Isis resurrected him, he is now the judge of the afterlife. In the same way that the Christ story replicates some aspects of Dionysus, other aspects of it replicate the Osiris story. The wronged one who was killed, crucified, cut into pieces, is resurrected as the Lord of the living and the dead. And so that idea, I think,